And life is a strange mixture, isn't it? Of life and death, death and life. There's a lot that went on when Jesus went to the cross and died for us. And one of the aspects of that beautiful diamond, one of the facets of that beautiful diamond, is that Jesus showed us not only what God does for us, but what reality itself is like. Because reality itself is death when things fall apart in our lives. And it's not just people when they die, but it's also anything that we feel loss about. A job, somebody moves away that we love, we lose contact. Even our own expectations. And I think we're going to explore this a little bit next week also, because it's so deep. Even when our expectations of life aren't met and we're hoping for something and it falls apart, there's grief involved. There's death. But God promises and demonstrated through the cross that death never, ever has the last word. Jesus demonstrated on the cross that death never, ever has the last word. And that's part of the good news, that there is resurrection. There is a power, as they would say in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in C.S. Lewis's book, Lion, Aslan, the lion, who comes back to life as a Christ symbol. And the wicked witch, says, you can't be alive, and all this stuff. And how did that happen? You're supposed to die. The law says you have to die. That is the magic. You have to die. You can't come back. And Aslan simply says, but there's a deeper magic still. And that's what Jesus points to, that resurrection power. The power that the Father raised him up is a demonstration that whatever we meet in life, wherever we experience loss, where our energy just flows out from us, where we lose any semblance of feeling in control, that God says, but I'm holding you. I'm holding you. I'm holding you tight. Yeah, these last few months brought up a lot of memories. And I've got a question for you too, because we're going to have a discussion after this. And I really want to hear your responses, and some thought in this. Because it is such a deep subject, and we've all gone through loss. That's what it means to be human, whether you've lost people in your lives or lost a job or lost this or that. We've all gone through loss. And the question is how do you experience loss? What goes on with you? And those of you willing to be honest, people love you here, and that's okay. But an honest answer, how do you experience loss? How do you go through that? Because it is a journey that keeps on giving. Just when you think you're done with it, that loss, it comes back in a new form, a new face. How do you experience loss? I remember, Rosalie Sasso's, I didn't go to that funeral. That was the day before on Thursday. But I remember going over there and just giving some hugs to Suzanne and Becky. And I remember Becky saying, she looked at me and she said, I really consider this a celebration. And I said, yeah, it is. And I say that in funerals too. The couple things that I usually say is that funerals or memorial services are a time for saying goodbye. It's for letting go. It's sad. It's a time where you feel there's an emptiness to that, and a part of you has been ripped out, and death is such a cheater, and all of that, and to be sad, it's appropriate to be sad. You're saying goodbye. On the other hand, too, at the same time, strangely, it's a time for love, for community, for a continuity. And I challenge people, probably almost at every funeral, I challenge people to live into the legacy of that person. That they live on in the ways that Jesus shone through their lives, through their hearts, through their attitudes. They live on in you as you take the very best of who they are and you carry it forward. You pay it forward in a sense. It's really true. And I think that's one aspect of eternal life that, we think of it very individualistically. We go up to heaven, and We have fun and eat all the chocolate we want and, have a great time, a very individual. And that's part of it. And we'll discuss some of that. But there's a greater sense of continuity and unity, too, to eternal life that involves the here and now. It's not just like secular and sacred. There's a unity to that. And that we carry on that aspect of that person in our lives in some exciting ways. And I was thinking about some of the things that I experienced. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'd like to look at the experience of death and loss, of grief and loss. And I had a whole bunch of scriptures lined up, just a ton of, it's going to be like a regular Bible study, because there's so much. That's one of the beautiful things about the Bible, is it's so real. It's not only truth about God, but it's truth about who we are as human beings. The good, bad, and the ugly. And how we struggle through things and all this. And it's just a beautiful set of stories that give us powerful truths about God, about ourselves, and about what it means to live. And so I had a whole ton of things that lined up for you, and God said, no, let's do one today. I go, whoa, okay, what's with that? But it's one of the longest stories in the Bible, and I'd like to read it to you, and it's found on page 81. That was Lori's assignment. Well done. Let's give Lori a hand. Good job. Yeah, we all have our place. 81, and if you have your own Bibles, flip to it. I'm going to be reading from a different translation. This is John chapter 11, and it's the story about a man named Lazarus. And actually in the original language, Aramaic, which is what they spoke in those days, kind of a kindred language to Hebrew, Middle Eastern language. In Aramaic, it's actually Eliezer. Eliezer, that's Lazarus's, if you want to do the true thing there. Eliezer is Lazarus's real name. We've kind of Latinized it and made it modern or whatever. But Eliezer, and what does Eliezer mean? It means God helps. God helps you. What a great name. God helps. Well, God helped him out in a big way. And I'd like to read that story to you because it has within it some answers to the questions of, well, how did Jesus handle grief and stuff like that? So, John chapter 11, this is from the Message. This is the real Bible right here in Kindle, Amazon Kindle, the real Bible. No, electronic. This is the Message. A man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. This was the same Mary who massaged the Lord's feet with aromatic oils and then wiped them with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was sick, so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Master, the one you love so very much is sick. When Jesus got the message, he said, this sickness is not fatal. It will become an occasion to show God's glory by glorifying God's Son. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, but oddly, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed on where he was for 2 more days. After the 2 days, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. They said, Rabbi, you can't do that. The Jews are out to kill you, and you're going back? Jesus replied, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daylight doesn't stumble because there's plenty of light from the sun. Walking at night, he might very well stumble because he can't see where he's going. He said these things and then announced, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up. The disciples said, Master, if he's gone to sleep, he will get a good rest and wake up feeling fine. Jesus was talking about death, while his disciples thought he was talking about taking a nap. Then Jesus became explicit. Lazarus died. Am I glad for your sake that I wasn't? And I am glad for your sakes that I wasn't there. You're about to be given new grounds for believing. Now let's go to him. That's when Thomas, the one called the twin, said to his companions, come along, we might as well go and die with him. When Jesus finally got there, he found Lazarus already 4 days dead. Bethany was near Jerusalem, only a couple of miles away, and many of the Jews were visiting Martha and Mary, sympathizing with them over their brother. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Mary remained in the house. Martha said, "Master, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask God, he will give you." And Jesus said, "Your brother will be raised up." Martha replied, "I know that he will be raised up in the resurrection at the end of time." "You don't have to wait for the end," Jesus said. "I am right now, resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. And everyone who lives believing in me does not ultimately die at all. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Master," she said. "All along I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." After saying this, she went to her sister Mary and whispered in her ear, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." The moment she heard that, she jumped up and ran out to him. Jesus had not yet entered the town, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When her sympathizing Jewish friends saw Mary run off, they followed her, thinking she was on her way to the tomb to weep there. Mary came to where Jesus was waiting and fell at his feet, saying, "Master, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews with her sobbing. A deep anger welled up within him. And he said, "Where did you put him?" "Master, come and see," they said. And now Jesus wept. And the Jews said, "Look how deeply he loved him." Others among them said, "Well, if he loved him so much, why didn't he do something to keep him from dying? After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man." Then Jesus, the anger again welling up within him, arrived at the tomb. It was a simple cave in the hillside with a slab of stone laid against it. And Jesus said, "Remove the stone." The sister of the dead man, Martha, said, "Master, by this time there'll be a stench. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus looked her in the eye. "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Then to the others, "Go ahead, take away the stone." They removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and prayed, "Father, I'm grateful that you have listened to me. I know you always do listen, but on account of this crowd standing here, I've spoken that they might believe that you sent me." Then he shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And he came out, a cadaver, wrapped from head to toe with a kerchief over his face. And Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." I always have to chuckle a little bit, because I don't know about you, but I'm a visual person, and I like visualize stuff. And I just visualize poor Lazarus. I mean, they really wrap these guys up, and he's like trying to come out like this, barely making it. You know, he's hopping like a little cocoon or something. I don't know. Wrap him, let him go. Let him free. Because nobody's doing anything, right? They're just kind of doing this. You might think of unwrapping him. 3 things stood out to me in all of this. 3 points, and maybe more things stood out to you. And there's no translation that's perfect in this, because I noticed I played with it just a little bit because I know the Greek and all that stuff. But I encourage you to read other translations too. In fact, you can get Bibles that have columns, if you're able to multitask like that have different translations, because translation is as much an art as it is a science. It's a mixture of both, and good translators know that and try to bring something contemporary out of ancient texts, and to translate that is not an easy thing. So that was from the Message. I usually read from the New American Standard Bible. But there's New International Version, there's New Living Translation, there's all sorts of stuff. So, find yourself a Bible translation that works for you. But anyway, 3 things stand out for me in this, and the central question is, how do you experience grief and loss? Well, let's look at Jesus, see what he was up to, and it might give us some clues as to where we might go with that. The first thing, I'll make sure I get the right 3 things. Oh, first thing was, it's interesting that he waited 2 days. Probably really, really frustrating to those who knew Lazarus. He waited 2 days. He does this in some other places too, where he waits, and he just takes his sweet time going someplace. But knowing something really, really important. And the first thing has to do with God's timing. God's timing. And Jesus did what Paul encourages all of us to do. One of his favorite phrases is to walk in the Spirit. And there's a certain pace or a cadence, learning to walk in God's timing for you. And this is not just God's ultimate goals and all this, but I mean day to day. When you get into a rush and you get going real fast, and you get ahead of yourself in a sense, and you goof things up and fumble things, and nothing's working right, and of course you get more frustrated, which adds to more fumbling and more frustration and anger and everything else. God gives you kind of that word to slow down, and that there's a pace that you can go at, whether you're at home or at business or gardening or whatever you're doing. There's a certain pace and a method that God gives to you as a gift to do whatever you need to do in peace, joy, love, patience, all that jazz, all the things we wish for, but want to experience. But there's a pace, there's a timing to everything in life. Jesus knew this. And so he took the 2 days, and he says, this is so that you can see the glory of God, because it was time for somebody to be raised from the dead. It wasn't just a healing, but Jesus downplays it. Oh, I'm just waking him up. It's no big deal. Well, that's the way it is with God. It's not like God's working hard. Okay, come on now, wake up. God just breathes, and there's resurrection life in the air. And that's how easy it is, and we'll talk about healing someday too, for us as believers to begin to exercise the healing presence of God all around us. It's not an effort. It's more of an attitude, really. And it's about understanding and trusting some things that maybe you don't always trust or see. So anyway, Jesus, it's about timing. And no matter what we go through, and especially in grieving, when we're grieving loss in our lives, something that's going on, somebody that we've missed or have something that we've let go of, there's a timing to all of that. And we tend to rush stuff. We rush stuff. We're always in a rush. Good grief, Americans. We're always in a rush. When I spent 5-6 months in Mexico as a student, I took a break, and I lived down there for 5-6 months with a couple of families near Mexico City, in Cuernavaca, and learned Spanish. But I learned a lot more. I was a new believer at the time, too, so my learning curve was way up here. It was like Scott's pilgrimage. But anyway, the pace of life, if you've lived in a third world country, not a European country, because that's similar to, or Japan, or some of the, but a third world country where life is slower, simpler. And there's a siesta every day. And it's a whole different attitude and pace of life. And guess what? Stuff still gets done. But that was one of my learning curves as an American living down there in Mexico. That mañana, that was kind of the theme of the day, tomorrow. But stuff gets, it's like Drummond Island a little bit, Drummond Island time, what am I talking about? So things proceed at their own pace. God has his own timing in our lives. And so just to enjoy the ride, even when it's painful or broken or whatever, but enjoy the ride and try to figure out what is the pace that you should be going. And that will bring you not only greater peace, but it will bring you a greater sense of awareness of what the Lord's doing in your life during this challenging time called a grief journey. Okay, the second thing that popped out to me is that Jesus experienced a full range of emotions. I mean, Jesus isn't just kind of this religious wooden figure that goes, peace be with you, and some sort of godlike thing that we can't relate to. The whole purpose of Jesus is that we relate to him and understand, and that he relates to us on a human level, on a gut kind of human level. And he experiences all the emotions. He experiences anger. We'll talk about that in a second. Anger, and he weeps. He has tears. And he experiences, you can tell he's feeling all of this stuff going on. Not just the death of this really good friend of his, but the sadness of the people around him. He's experienced all of that. Because that's what God does. That's God's MO. God experiences all the stuff we go through and knows it and loves us through it. That's a picture of the Father. That's what he does for us. So when you're going through something, even when you're not on your best behavior, which we aren't usually, when we're going through grief or difficult emotions, you go through all this stuff, God's loving us through that. He's feeling our pain, but loving us through that if we care to kind of pay attention. And so Jesus experiences those full emotions, and on the cross, that's one of the things of the cross too, is that Jesus aligned himself with our pain, our suffering. He took it into himself. He took our sins and all the stuff that we goof up on, but also he took all of our pain and brokenness, Isaiah 53 says, and Paul says, and other places. He took everything in our lives, all that stuff, all the burdens that we bear or think we need to bear in this life, and he took them upon himself, and he gladly carries it. Again, that's what God does. That's his MO. That's how he operates. He loves to carry our burdens. Really? Yeah, really. So Jesus experiences those emotions. The anger that he felt was not towards the people around him. God doesn't get angry at you when you're going through hard times and don't know what's going on and which end is up, and God doesn't get angry at you. He was angry at the cosmic powers that are behind death and destruction in our lives. The cosmic forces of life that influence our life. Because the devil came to kill, steal, and destroy. And God isn't about destruction and violence and hurting us and stuff like that. He will not leave us alone when we're in the midst of that storm, but he is not the origin of death and destruction. And while death is a part of life, and kind of death and resurrection are part of the cycles of life and nature, and we see that, coming out of the death of winter, long death of winter, and into spring, and which is very fleeting here on Drummond, one day, and then summer, and then, but death it's not just a natural part of our reality, but it's also described as an enemy. Paul describes it as the last enemy to be conquered in 1 Corinthians 15, which is another good chapter to read about this whole death and resurrection process and what's going to happen to us. But anyway, death is an enemy that is to be conquered. And in the final days, when the whole universe, or at least our planet, gets redone, gets retransformed and changed, in the last days, God gets rid of death. In fact, death and Hades get thrown into the lake of fire, we read in Revelation. Death is rid of. Now, it's hard to imagine life without the cycles of death and all that, because it's so much part of who we are. But there will be a time that somehow God pulls it off. No more tears, no more sadness, no more death. And God's heart rejoices in that day, along with ours too. That there is a day coming when the creation will be remade. And there won't be the sadness, there won't be the sin, there won't be the selfishness. The ego stuff will be wiped away, and we'll live in a kind of unity that really is hard to imagine. I mean, we taste just a tiny little hors d'oeuvre of that, maybe once, but it will be a lifestyle. Full range of emotions. And so Jesus gives to us, and Paul does that too in his writings in the New Testament. In fact, the whole Bible, again, you see the full range of emotions in all of the families, the patriarchs, the prophets, the history books, everything, all the stories. Crazy stuff goes on in the Bible. Crazy stuff. Read the stories. But God loves them through it all. And he is a companion. And he guides them through it all. And raises up some unlikely figures to lead them through that. So never underestimate the surprise of God in the midst of your journey of grief. So the full range of emotions, to experience that, just like Jesus did. And he gives us permission. They're not good or bad, or you don't, not to put yourself down. Just give yourself, I always tell people, give yourself a lot of rope, when you're going through grief journey. Be gentle, be compassionate on yourself. That's how Jesus is. Final point that jumped out at me, and maybe this is one of your points too, is that the sisters approach him and they both say, if you had only been here, he wouldn't have died. And then there's that conversation, well, he is going to be raised up. And she responds, yeah, I know on the last day, because there's a theology and doctrine about the final resurrection, the final day where people will be resurrected. They'll be made alive. And Jesus goes, well, guess what? It's not about a place. It's not about a time. And it's not even a future hope. But it's about here and now. It's about me standing here in front of you. I am the resurrection. I am the life. And if you trust that, you will never die. Of course, he wasn't meaning physical body, but the essential you, and this is the important thing, your essential person inside, your soul, your consciousness, what makes you you in the deepest sense. If you trust the promise of Jesus, you will continue to live and grow and experience an eternity that is so far beyond anything you could imagine, because you're willing to have that conversation with life itself. And that's Jesus. And again, you don't have to memorize stuff. You don't have to be a scholar, a theologian, or anything like that. All you do is you put your hand out and you say, I want to take your hand. Teach me about what this resurrection life is all about. And that heaven, the journey to heaven, begins right here, right now, with your decision. God loves you. He can't love you any more than he already does. But part of the journey is learning to be open to that love that is there for us. Infinite, unconditional, crazy, passionate love that is in the air. And he longs to hold us. But he will not hold us if we don't want him to. If we insist on our independent ways, if we want to do life our own way, he will weep, just like Jesus wept in here. That the Father himself will weep, these like cosmic tears or whatever that is. But God will be sad. He will experience the deepest sadness he could ever experience, because you want to do it without his companionship, without his help. And again, it's not a big religious thing. You don't have to say a set prayer. You don't have to, read a booklet. You don't have to buy one of Pastor Scott's books, if I had a book or something. There's no marketing thing involved here. It's just a simple, I want to learn more about this resurrection life. It sounds cool, and it is. And you just do it in the secrecy of your own heart, or tell a friend, or have a prayer buddy or something, but make the choice for life, because it is a life and death decision. Make the choice. Choose life. Right here, right now. And that's the exciting part. So those are three things that stood out to me. This whole grief journey thing is that there is a power, a resurrection power from Jesus, from the Father, that is available to us to experience the full range of emotions, to go through your grief journey, when no matter how small or how large you may think it is, that God is with you. There's nothing too small where he isn't with you. And he is helping you to both experience the fullness of your emotional response to that, not good or bad, just who you are, but then not to stop there, but to look towards his walking you through this every step of the way in that resurrection power. And that there is a timing to all of this. And to be sensitive. Don't rush stuff. Don't rush it, either for yourself or for other people. Don't rush it. So what is your experience? And I'll kick this off. What's your experience of death and loss, whether it's a person or losing a job or expectation or just life didn't work out for you? I remember I've told this story before about after my first wife passed away, and it was the deepest sorrow that I had ever experienced. And I'm pretty happy-go-lucky. I mean, I'm Mr. Positive and all this stuff. 4-8 principle. But I experienced depression, long-term depression. I was still functional, but I could feel it. It was a heavy weight. But in that sadness, I remember telling Bishop Mallory when we were talking, this is just like a week or two after Barb's funeral, and I said, with tears in my eyes, I looked at him and I said, I've never felt so close to Jesus. I've never felt so close to God. How does that work? Death and life working together, the power of God.